Windows Server 2019 System Administration. Welcome back, everybody. I'm Prakash Pradhan, your trainer for this entire series. So in today's topic, it's a day 3, a part 2. In last class, we have also learned how to install additional domain controller as a failover mechanism. Apart from that, we do come across certain situations where we need to install RODC. This means read-only domain controller. This is read-only copy of your domain where all the objects will be copied from the primary domain controller to this partner server. We call it read-only domain controller, since the word itself is saying this is read-only, where user will not be able to modify any object, they will not be able to create any object, they will simply copying entire objects from primary domain controller to the read-only domain controller. So let's see what might be the possible cause that we might come across the necessity of your read-only domain controller in your network environment. So let's say we have a branch office in Washington DC and we are supposed to install another domain controller as a authentication mechanism for your next destination server that will be acting as a branch office. That means the main office is in Washington DC and the branch office is in here India. So over here, if you see, if your Washington DC is holding a main primary server, you would like to have a read-only domain controller in India so that your entire network or entire domain is actually controlled from the Washington DC itself. So the branch office where in India, certain workstations are there, certain clients are there, they will be looking after via your read-only domain controller, but entire authentication will be done from the Washington DC. So now there might be some reason why we need to have this to install read-only domain controller. Number one reason, it might be a security issue. That means if a primary domain controller is in Washington DC and you install an additional domain controller in the next country in India, so there might be certain security issue. And the next one might be poor physical security. Sometimes we have to see about the physical security of your primary domain controller as well, because if the primary domain controller security is being compromised by some other means, in that case your entire database will be copied or stolen by someone else. So that's why you need to be careful. So there might be some need in under this situation to have your read-only domain controller in your branch office. And the next reason, I guess it might be this also, that you may not have a IT minded staff, because in order to look after your entire read-write domain server or this domain controller, there must be skilled manpower. Okay, so it's not possible everywhere. Anytime you want, the skilled manpower might be available in any place. It's not like that the all the developing countries, they are going to have all the IT skill minded, or it might be IT manpower, skilled manpower might be available anytime, which may not be true all the time. You might be in certain situations, certain space where the IT staff is very less. So in that case, there is again security issue. So that's why, without having the proper knowledge of domain also, anyone who can just look after the read-only domain controller, because that is only read-only domain. That means you will not have any permission to look after any objects or to bring or just to modify any object's password, okay, resetting a password or renewing their any kind of account, okay, or creating any objects. So these works will not be done from the read-only domain controller. So that's why we are going to set this read-only domain controller in our branch office. So without wasting much time, so let's see, okay, which are the requirements for deploying the read-only domain controller. Number one, you must have credentials of the domain admin, without which you will not be able to promote that as a read-only domain controller. And number two, the forest functional level of Windows Server must be 2003, I mean to say, or later. At least one writable domain, because you see, when we talk about a read-only domain controller, it's a read-only copy from another one primary server. That means another one your partner server. So in that case, in order to configure the read-only domain controller, you need to have at least one read-write domain controller in your network environment. Now, without wasting much time, let's move now straight to our main server where we're going to install your read-only domain controller. So this one is the partner server. This is just a member of domain controller. And in order to promote this computer or this server as a read-only domain controller, you need to install your Active Directory roles over here. From here, see, I have done this for you so that it takes less time. Just I'll take you to that screen where it has to be ticked. Just that, okay? In order to save your time, I have done this. This one, Active Directory Domain Services role has to be installed in that target server where you want to install your read-only domain controller. It might be in a branch office. So after installing this Active Directory Domain Services role, you will have to configure it the same way you did last time in a previous class to promote your domain controller. So over here, I simply click. Now it will process the same process, that it will follow the same step. So now over here, I would like to add a domain controller to an existing domain. Obviously, there is a server or the domain called viatech.co. Inside this domain, I would like to add this read-only domain controller as a part of the domain. That means that will be also acting as a domain controller, but the only difference is that that will be read-only, where objects, group policies, entire things will be copied as it is from the primary domain controller, and it will be replicated to your read-only domain controller. And where the system admin or whoever IT staff, IT guys are there, they are simply to watch. They cannot bring any modification. Okay. Now, as I already said, it's a primary server. Okay. Now, if you want to change it or you want to select it, okay, supply the credentials to perform the operation. Obviously, I need to do this. Otherwise, this one I'm in a partner server. That means this is simply server family operating system is installed. Okay, but it does not have a server credential. So I'm going to do it the credential from the main server. That is administrator@viatech.co, and I'm going to give the password. This is not pre-staged, so that's why I'm giving this password. Now move it to the next step. Then it should give you this option for choosing read-only domain this controller rather than having the full read-write copy. Now see here, here is the option. Domain name server, obviously it's a part of this global catalog. This is also same thing. Now here we are going to click it now. That means this server which I am going to promote as a member server, but that will be read only, and both will be in a first default site. See, there's a default first site. That means both will be under this first site. And I hope you remember this is the option for setting a directory service restore mode password. Okay, now this will be also done by the system administrator. Even if you forget this password, don't worry, administrator can do this. And this one I'm going to show you in future days. Okay, now over here, then it will verify rest of the required things. Now over here, account that are allowed to replicate password to RODC, allowed password replication group. Now you might be having certain password that you would like to replicate in a read-only domain controller so that the authentication process is done faster. Otherwise, authentication has to be done via your read-only domain controller to your main head office. That means there might be some account that you'd like to replicate over here. That means, allow this password to be replicated over here in a certain group. So this is up to you. If you'd like to add it over here right now only, this is up to you. Or you can do it later on also. But right now, I do not want to cache any of the password in my read-only domain controller. That is the only prime concern over here as a security factor. So let's go to next. Now it's saying specify additional replication option. Remember, we have only one domain here. If you leave it as it is, trust me, it will work. Or you can choose your domain. So if by not choosing a domain name, if I click any domain controller, even if it works, then why do I have to choose this one? The reason is if you have multiple domain in a forest, then you'll have problem. You'll have to be specific. Okay, you might be trying to get the replication from the wrong server. So that's why. And I'm not going to install it from the media. Let's go to next. Now remember, when we promote a domain controller to the server family operating system, it's going to create all these folders. That means your database for the objects. And the log file is also there. And obviously this is for your group policies. So that's why all of these three folders will be generated automatically when you promote this server operating system into the domain controller. So now this is a simple configuration report. It's going to display over here. Okay, and then simply click next. Now it's going to install. That was some sort of this summarization only. Whatever setting that was being done. Verifying the prerequisite for the domain controller operation. So it has to get passed through this. Okay, everything is okay. There is no issue. It's saying that all prerequisite checks pass successfully. That means now this server is able to act as a read-only domain controller and the role will be added. So I'm going to click install. So it takes few minutes. So by the time, let's see the changes that we see in our primary domain controller. This is the primary domain controller. So let's see the Active Directory users in computers and the name of the computer that is going to be displayed in a form of your workstation or the your computers or in a domain controller. So let's go over here, Active Directory users and computers. Let it load. ICT, I often say that initial configuration test, your server operating system must pass through this, otherwise you will not be allowed to log in. So over here, domain controller. See, we have two domain controllers now. Both are in first site. If I go to computers, still I have two. Okay, domain controller, these are the two computers. So let's see now whether in your read-only domain controller role is added or not. Still it's installing, it takes time. But I've often heard some people, sometimes the people used to say that due to the authentication is being done via my head office, so it takes time. So see, these are the certain factors that you have to consider when you talk about, or when you're serious, or when you're concerned about the security issue. If you wanted to get authenticated from your read-only domain controller, then those passwords has to be stored in the cache. That means there might be a possibility that certain hackers, they can get your system, they use certain third-party tools, and they get your full username and password in order to log in your network environment. If they do that, if it is done, then the security is being compromised. So that's why read-only domain controller is needed sometime, especially in a branch office. So it's trying to copy the entire object, okay, replicating everything into read-only domain controller. That means from my primary domain controller to the second target computer. So let it go for a few seconds, or I get a few minutes, I think. Then we'll see the entire things are being copied, and then we'll see practically that the object that has been created in primary domain controller will be automatically copied into your read-only domain controller, whereas you will not be allowed to create any of the objects in our read-only domain controller, and some of the options on the menus will be hidden over here. Hidden in a sense, it will be faded, it will not be allowed to use you, since it's only the read-only copy. So it's securing coverage policy. Let it go now. So by the time we'll create some of the objects in our primary domain controller, so that it proves that the objects are being copied in our read-only domain controller. So I'm going to create it one object in a form of your user. Let's create one user. Okay, so over here I'm going to create one user. Since we already had two users, so let's create at least one to see that the replication is done from the primary domain controller to the read-only. So I'm going to write RODC, let's say user. Okay, this is just for the testing purpose, DC user. Okay, I'm gonna give the password, of course the same one. Both the options cannot be selected here. Remove it, enter this, and I'm gonna create the password, the top secret complex password. Everybody knows that, CMP@SSW0RD. So that's the most commonly used your secret password everywhere. Okay, it's a secret. Everybody knows that. Okay, now so let's see in our okay, it's done now. So in our second member server, the read-only domain controller has been successfully installed. Now it has to be restarted. So after the server is being restarted, we'll witness that the changes what we do in primary domain controller is been successfully replicated into your second read-only domain controller. So by the time it starts, so let's see now your domain controller. See, remember last time two computers were there. Now it's moved. Where? Here. Server 2 is my read-only domain controller. See, it's saying here read-only domain controller. And if you like to see the further information about it, you can go to the property, then you see it shows certain information. That means the operating system that's been used in our server 2 is your Windows Server 2019 Standard Edition, and this is the version. Okay, and if I ask about the password replication policy, These are the users whose password is allowed. That means only read-only domain controllers users password is allowed to remain in a cache, so that you can log in your domain at, at a faster speed, because you do not have to get authenticated from your head office. Whereas entire other group, see here now, entire other users, their passwords are not stored in a cache. This is domain admin, so far I remember. See, others are not stored over here. So that is the advantage actually. And if you would like to see a member of read-only domain controller, this is a member, but it's a read-only domain controller. Whenever I say this, it reminds me of VPN, if you remember, So now, location, we don't have to see that. Our prime concern is password replication policy over here. If you like to add it, allow password for the account to replicate to this RODC. That means, let's say there is one user whose password is to be replicated in a read-only domain controller, so that the login is done faster. Okay, because when you log in, authentication is done from the head office. So otherwise, add it, allow passwords for the account to replicate to the RODC, user served groups. Now it's asking you, so whose password do you want to be cached over here? Okay, so let's do it, RODC user, which we created last time. Okay, now if you see over here, RODC user, this password is also allowed to store in a cache over here. See, normally read-only domain controller means this is only read-only copy. That means even your password is not cached in that server. But sometime we might come across certain situations, certain circumstances where the user's password is to be stored in a cache if you want to log in faster than any other normal client. Okay, now I don't think that I need to see, or I need to wait over here to see that the read-only domain controller is successfully completed or they created, because we have already seen over here. But there is one more thing that we need to make sure, that is the replication of all these primary domain controllers objects, including the group policy, they all are copied. Okay, so let's create one group policy as well to see that it has done everything. So by the time my read-only domain controller is restarting, so I'm going to create one group policy. So this group policy will also be created or replicated in our read-only domain controller. So let's see and create new group policy, or let's create, okay, I guess group policy is better, I think. This I don't want. Let's create it here. Let's say for RODC testing. Okay, this GPO is being created here. Okay, and linked. Okay, this is created and linked. So now here, if I go down, these are the default one. Okay, this is a default one, this is domain controllers. All these things are going to be linked or created over here. You want to link, you want to create a link. Okay, let's say second, entire thing will be linked over here and copied. Okay, entire thing is done over here, created and linked. You want to block, you want to do any other organizational unit. Okay, RODC, just for the sake of testing. See, this will be replicated. Create and link over here for RODC OU, let's say. Okay, now this one is also created over there. Now by the time, I hope your read-only domain controllers wake up. Okay, it's okay. Administrator, remember the local admin's password remains in cache. That is the default setting. That's why it's loading faster. It doesn't mean that when the password is not stored in a cache, it does loading faster. I mean to say slow. But normally comparing to the local environment, when you log in a read-only domain controller, using the authentication process from your head office, normally it takes time. So This is the first time we are logging after we promote this server as a domain controller, so it might take few seconds, not minute, I guess. Okay. Okay, it's coming now. Now we'll see over here the entire objects, the group policy, OU, entire things will be copied in this read-only domain controller as well. But it's not a wise, it's not a good idea to store your password of any client in your read-only domain controller, because there is a chances to get compromised with the security issue. So that's why I don't suggest anyone to store the password in RODC. That's the last thing that we need to see over here. Then I guess this one was easy to understand and easy in this configuration also. Okay, so wait for a few seconds, it's loading, and this is in my virtual. I've installed at least 3 to 4 operating system in my Hyper-V, so that's why it might work slower. It's loading. Okay, don't forget, after you join any server operating system as an additional domain or as a read-only domain, that computer name will be removed from the computers and it will be copied or moved to the domain controllers. Otherwise, you might be wondering why your computer name is not listed in this computer, because now this is not the normal workstation. Now this is also working as a domain controller. That's why. So it's almost done. We have almost reached to see the entire implementation of your read-only domain controller. Okay, it's loaded. Now we want to see that all the objects from the primary domain controller is being loaded into your read-only domain controller. See now. This is RODC. It's loading. I'm pretty sure the entire things have been copied. There's nothing to wait. See here. See, I told you RODC is there. This is the OU we created in the primary domain controller. Okay. And if you remember the users, remember RODC user was created. This is automatically done. Now, if I go to primary domain controller and create one object. So let's see, I'm going to create one object here. Definitely it's going to work fast over here now because this console was already open. Now I'll create another one user. Okay, let's see that, because I need to see this practically use also. Okay, let's say testing one. This is the next user I created in a primary domain controller. Testing one. This is the user, and I'm gonna give the password. Okay, this is done. Now see, this object is created in your primary domain controller, and I told you what you create, any object will be automatically replicated in your read-only domain controller. Now if I go back to my read-only domain controller, that is here, that should be replicated. Okay, refresh it, it will come. Did you notice here? Testing one. But what about you wanted to create one object over here? Okay, let's try that. Right click, don't forget, this is the read-only domain controller, new user. Let's create it. Test2. Let's give the password as well. RD. Okay, next, let's see now what happens. Test2 is created because we have connected in a primary domain, because I log in using the primary domain credential. Now right click, change the domain, browse it. This is okay. Okay, now here if I say I'm in primary domain controller, right click in Active Directory, change the domain that we are supposed to do over here, browse. Okay, that is okay. So let's do this way, change the domain controller, and I'm gonna choose read only server 2. See here what happens. This I did intentionally. Why? When you log in for the first time in RODC domain controller, we take the credential from the primary domain controller, and when you log in using the credential of primary domain controller, it will directly redirect you to the read write copy. So in order to change as a read only, change domain controller, choose this one. Okay, selected domain is read only. You will not be able to perform any write operation. Then you might be wondering, then any user whoever looks after the read only domain controller can create the any object over here. What is the purpose of saying RODC? I think you forgot. What? We never give the primary domain controller's password to the branch office IT guy. That's why. So now they will get this console. So this is the read only. Now if I go to right click, is there new? No, it's not there. Why? Because it's been logged in using the credential for the read-only domain controller. That means now we have login in a branch office, which is the read-only domain controller. There is no option to create a new. Whereas if I go to my primary domain controller, I click right click, see, new option is here. I create one object, immediately it will get replicated in our read-only domain controller. Whereas in a read-only domain controller, we will not be able to do any changes. See here, you cannot do anything. How about group policy? So let's try that. And I'm opening the group policy of my read-only domain controller. So let's see what it says. Okay, it has already displayed over here. Open it. Remember, we created last time. It's been replicated. Okay, right click. Is the option to create anything? Here, yeah. Click it. Okay. Specified server cannot perform the requested operation. Why? This is the read-only domain controller. Okay, so I think the entire thing went very smoothly. It was very informative, I guess. And I would like to thank you for watching this video, and I do believe it's going to add something to your knowledge, and that is going to help you to perform your day-to-day tasks as a system administrator. So if you like this video, if you think it's fruitful, so kindly do like and subscribe. Thank you.